Hi, this is Pete Heiniger, and this is the Stages Podcast. So, welcome to another episode. Today, I am going to do part one, and this is kind of on purpose. Is there's been a lot of discussion around Thor, the movie Thor, Love and Thunder. And I don't know that if you've read any of the press as far as just some individuals, have decided the movie should have had warnings on it because it shares some graphic scenes about cancer and cancer treatment. And so I wanted to do a part one for this because I haven't watched it yet. And so I wanted to give you my thoughts before I ever even go in, and then I will do part two after seeing it, and I will then tell you how I felt about it after seeing it. And so you'll kind of get to see if I change my mind, or if I'm stay pretty resolute. So let's just talk about this. I think the first thing that I want to say is that when you're fighting cancer and you're cancer fighter, there are just a lot of things that you notice that a lot of people won't take note of. And I think that's probably true of the caregivers as well. Wish I had Sherry here to add her perspective, but um, you know, there's rarely a show, whether it's a TV series on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime, all the major groups. There's rarely a TV show or a movie that doesn't somehow, in some way, shape, or form, have some touch point with cancer. And so I just want to say, like, most people won't even notice it. They'll just be like, oh, that was a story of somebody who was in the hospital, or that was, their father had, something I don't remember. They just won't take note of it. But when you have cancer and you're fighting cancer, you just seem to notice all of those instances in which cancer is a major theme running through at least some part of the show. And if it isn't, then for sure, if you're on a streaming service that also does commercials, then inevitably there's going to be some sort of commercial that's about, cancer and somebody that's facing cancer, some treatment for cancer, some sort of drug for cancer, you name it. And so there's just, it's just kind of, all over the place, right? It's going to be in the news. It's going to be, just all over. So you're just going to take note of things that most people wouldn't take note of, right? It's kind of like that whole idea of confirmation bias. Once you decide, that you love a certain car in a certain color, certain make and model, then all of a sudden you start seeing it everywhere. And the truth is that there weren't any more of that make and model and that color car out there. You're now looking for it. Your mind is kind of preset to notice and look for that. Give you an example of that. Not too long ago, a few years back, I was an executive pastor at a large church here in Colorado Springs. And we had a gentleman who had attended a church service on a Sunday morning, and he was struggling with some mental health issues, and he had wanted to kind of stand up and make a big announcement during church. And so he had asked one of our production team. She did the right thing and got him to me. I brought him kind of outside into the lobby, and we had a discussion. I was very clear that's not something that we're gonna do. Long story short, he tried and attempted, and our security had to kind of deal with that. And we just, we kind of just sat him back down. But he then sat through the rest of the service, but then I had to confront him, and let him know some things that he wasn't too thrilled about when the service concluded. And unbeknownst to me, later that week, he started talking with some family members and extended family members about how he was going to kill me. And long story short is that he made a threat on my life, and had told them what service he was going to show up. And so we had a lot of plainclothes police officers out in the parking lot. We had other squad cars, and he did show up with intention to cause me harm, but he drove a yellow Xterra. And so the reason why I bring all this up is that, as you can imagine, like every single time that I was driving down the road and there was a yellow Xterra beside us or behind us or crossing the parking lot or whatnot, you took notice, right? It wasn't that there were, I probably didn't give a second thought to a yellow Xterra until that was the car that he showed up in, and the police surrounded him, and they had to bring him in, and he had to spend some time in a facility, and everything, and I feel bad because I know that he had not taken some medication and he was having some difficulties, and so in the end he got the help he needed, and he went down to a facility near his mom in Texas, and everything I think is fine now. So that's the good side of it. But I just want to say confirmation bias is a real thing. So when you have cancer, I think that's one of the things that you're going to have to understand, is that you are going to have a significant notice, what am I trying to say, like awareness, sensitivity to cancer, the word cancer, maybe even the specific type that you have, and you're gonna just pick up on things. You also will notice things that you probably walked by in Walmart and saw somebody and thought, oh, that's an oxygen tube, or that's a this or that, and didn't give it a second thought. But now you realize that, oh, that's not going into their nose. That's an infusion pump, right? And they have a little bag or backpack that they're carrying, and they're actually on chemo. And so those things are you just take notice of them, probably some things that you wouldn't have, before you had that diagnosis. So I just want to say it's really easy for us as cancer fighters to be sensitive. I don't mean sensitive in that it offends you or bothers you necessarily, as I just mean you just take notice, like you see those things more readily, because they're at the forefront of your mind. Your mind is constantly thinking about things, and cancer might be one of those things, or treatment or chemo or any number of things. And so you're just going to be more sensitive to those things. So that's kind of out of the gate, how I feel about Thor, Love and Thunder, and a lot of the bad press that I've been reading, that they should have put a warning in there and everything, is that it's you kind of have to, as a cancer fighter, at least I would encourage you've got to determine how you can be thick-skinned when it comes to those things. One, a lot of your friends and family members want to be there for you and they want to talk to you, but they don't know what to say. And a lot of times they're going to say something that is trite, or they're going to tell you about some treatment, that they want you to try, or some diet or something like that. And so you've got to take everything, as a grain of salt. And I think you've got to take everything in stride, that ultimately somebody is just trying to bless you and say the right thing. And yet sometimes they don't. Sometimes it gets awkward. Sometimes they're just unsolicited advice or unsolicited tips and pointers on things, but they're really just trying to help, right? And they're concerned about you. So I think in general, we as cancer fighters have to grow just a thicker skin. I think you just have to be able to kind of push that aside and recognize the truth, as if somebody actually cares about you. And sure, there's going to be people who just say really general things, and in the beginning, especially when you're reeling from the diagnosis, those can be hurtful, right? Just like, oh, we're, keep the faith, stick in it, God's got a reason, kind of thing. And you can choose to get offended by that, but I think ultimately you just kind of got to categorize that, put it in the right category, and then move forward. I think cancer fighting is about moving forward and being ready for the fight. And if those, to be honest with you, if those things are going to make you stumble, you're going to have a rough fight. And I'm just being honest. I'm just trying to be straight up honest with you. If little tiny things where people say some comments that just aren't, or generalize or cliche or whatever, you've got to get to a point where that just doesn't offend you and doesn't bother you, because there's a lot more that's coming your way, that you're going to have to deal with, right? And so if you just want to make sure that small stuff, when I played football, we used to have this, it was made out of PVC pipe, I think, and it had a bunch of rope stretched across one way, and then another couple. So there were basically big rectangles, and they were kind of split into two sides, and you had to do these running drills. Back in the day when I first started playing football, it was tires, right? You had these tires, and you had to go through, and your foot had to touch the center, in between each tire. And the whole point was that, you didn't want to get tripped up. You want to get your feet up, get your feet up, get your feet up, get your knees up, And so we used to have coaches that would say, hey, you can't get tripped up by the small stuff. You got to you rise above, get your legs up, get your knees up, get your, and the whole point is that, a lot of times somebody isn't squaring up with you. They're trying to make an arm tackle. And so if you can get used to powering through and getting your legs up and your knees up, then those little hands and arm grabs just aren't going to stop you or tackle you or whatnot. So I would say the same philosophy is when you're a cancer fighter. You've really got to not let the small stuff get to you. It can't trip you up. And that may take some time. I know it's more difficult when we're first starting out, the diagnosis is fresh, but I think, it's got to be one of the first things on your agenda list is just don't let those small things rub you the wrong way, because that can just cause you a lot of hurt and pain. And, it's okay to talk about. Maybe they bother you a little bit, and you can just kind of shove them off into a category. And then when you have time with a loved one or some friends who said, hey, confide in me, talk to me, let it all spill, then you let the frustration of that out, and then you deal with it and walk away from it. But the important thing is not to let that stuff bother you. So that's, to me, like step one when I think of Thor, Love and Thunder, and then having graphic scenes about cancer treatment and everything. And I know, secondly, that there are things where we see something and it can become a trigger, for us, or reminds us of a really bad experience. There's a lot of things that go on in my mind, that are traumatic around chemotherapy. I also had my colon resectioned in a surgery, and then I had an ostomy bag, and then I had that reversal. And there were a lot of things during and in and through that were very traumatizing, and just things I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I wish I didn't have to go through them. And so, yeah, there's a thing where if that was depicted in a show, it could be a trigger, like, oh, but more than just a reminder of trauma, I think, beyond that, it shouldn't trip me up too much, right? And so I think, yes, there are triggers. But again, I think you have to understand that we're all of us cancer fighters, and those who are caregivers for loved ones with cancer, we're all very sensitive. And again, so we notice things a lot more than the average person. And so what we don't want to do is get into assigning intentionality or or we assign bad motives to something or someone. And so I'm sure that there wasn't a bunch of individuals that were thinking about the writers, that are working on Thor, Love and Thunder, who are thinking like, what I want to do is just be very, create a bunch of triggers in here for people who are fighting with cancer, and make it super emotional and super graphic and real. And so I just don't think we can assign those motives to them. I think that to actually think that somebody is that callous and just to make that assumption, I just don't think that's something that we need to be doing. And if you're like me, I think if in I don't, obviously I have a faith that in God that I talk about, and of course I know some of you listening don't necessarily share that faith, and that's fine, and and whatnot. But with my faith, I just think of that and think, well, that's kind of between them and God. I mean, yeah, there could be somebody out there that's that callous and maybe he had some bad motives or something like that. I just don't think, I don't want to assume that that's the norm, right? And I don't want to ascribe that kind of motive, to any individual. I'd rather give them the benefit of the doubt. And sure, I mean, if I'll let them sort it out with God, um, if they're being terrible. Okay, so I think two is just, we talked first about, hey, don't let the small stuff trip you up. Don't let these little things, these things that people say or something, just recognize that you can be overly sensitive. I think number two is just that don't ascribe motives to people, because it's just a really dangerous thing mentally. You can start to kind of believe your own reasoning and drink your own Kool-Aid, and you can really kind of back yourself into a corner where you just think everybody is against you. Nobody really cares about your circumstances and your challenge and your journey. And, that can only lead to really, really difficult mental health issues. It can lead to, bouts of depression, sadness, sorrow, of feeling all alone, and all those things. And there's so much about the fight against cancer that already puts you into a category or can make you feel isolated. You don't need to be inventing more ways. And so I would just encourage you, don't ascribe motives to people. Let God sort that out, kind of Matthew 7 it. um, there's a God who sits in a throne, and one of his main jobs is judge. And that actually isn't my job description. And so I leave judgment to him, and I don't enter that space because that's not my job. I have a job that has been given to me by God, and that's to love, first of all, him, to love God with everything that I have, but also to love others. And I really believe that, when we say love, we're talking about, ascribing infinite worth and value to people. And I know that's hard, but it doesn't change the fact that it's true. And I hope you hear that. When you think of God the Father and you think of Jesus dying on the cross, it's an example, it's, the only example of where, a father gave up something of infinite worth and value to him, for the sake of the entire world. So when you think, the God the Father could not love any person more infinitely than he loved his son. So when he gives his son up for you and for me and for the whole world, in that very act, in that very moment, he is ascribing infinite worth and value. I just want you to understand, infinite, right? Infinite. There is nothing that a person can do to lessen their worth and value before God. And there's nothing a person can do to get more worth and value before God. So, checklist Christianity, I go to church, I do this, I give, I tithe, I do all these things. If that makes you somehow feel better than somebody, then you don't understand who God is and the love that he ascribed to you. And if I can't earn more, also I can't, earn less. I can't do something and all of a sudden I have less worth and value to God. That's not how it works. And so it's not conditional, it's unconditional. And so that's, what we're called to do. Of course, it's much harder, I'm sure, for us in a lot of ways because we're human and we want to get into that judgment seat and we want to look at people. But I just want to encourage you, when you think of people and what they say and what they do, and even, when it is about cancer, that we can't get into that area of judge and ascribe motives. Okay, so does that make sense? So one, understand that you're sensitive and don't let the small stuff trip you up. And two, don't ascribe motivation to people. Let God sort that out. And it's going to be far better for you and your mental health if you do so. But in general, let me just shoot off the cuff. I mean, quite honestly, I don't ever go to a movie, especially Thor, Love and Thunder, with some idea that it's going to, help motivate me through cancer or anything. I go to a movie for entertainment and entertainment value and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of things that could be in a movie that could be that could be offensive, and maybe I would think maybe that they didn't need to have that in there. But I just am not going to make that choice when it comes to truly depicting the reality of cancer. The truth is, maybe you don't want to look at it. The truth is, maybe it sucks to look at it. Maybe watching a scene like that is really, really hard. But you know what? It might be hard on you, but it's raising awareness for others. There's a lot of people out there who have friends and family who are dealing with cancer, and they don't know what that's like. And so in any way that somebody can kind of depict the reality of what treatment's like and what you go through and the emotions that go with it and the finality and understanding your own mortality and all those things that go with a cancer diagnosis and suffering at the hands of cancer, the more people can see that and see it as a reality and help people see that, I think is a big deal. I think it's a really good deal. In fact, I think it's a big win for us cancer fighters, because in many ways it kind of tells at least an example of our own story. And the more people can wrap their head around that and understand what that's like, I think the better off the world is, because then we can have empathy for people. So those are my thoughts going into Thor, Love and Thunder. I think, just doing our best to I'm going to go in and want to be entertained. I think it's probably going to be a movie that's more like Thor Ragnarok, and I thought that was pretty funny and had a lot of humor in it. And I think this is going to be in a similar vein. And so that's what I'm going to look at. It's going to be action. It's going to be, a lot of humor. There's going to be a lot of fun with it. And so just appreciate it for what it is, right? And all in all, I mean, you don't have to go see it. So I mean, if you think it's somehow going to trigger you, but you know what, this is just one thing I would say: we're never going to grow past areas that we avoid. You're never going to grow past areas that you avoid. So just keep that at the forefront of your mind in anything that you're working through, whether it's cancer, whether it's challenges, depression, anxiety, any of those things. That if you're not willing to put yourself in situations that might trigger you, it with the right support, to try to face them and face your fears, then to that degree, it really makes it difficult to ever move past those things. And so I think, though, and there's limitations, and I'm not trying to dispense, you know, advice that you're not asking for, but I am just saying, like, in my own experiences, I know, like, if I never face something, if I never take on the challenge, then I'll just never beat it. And you have to ask yourself, like, I mean, is that how you want to live your life? It's not how I choose to live my life, at least. um I want to face it. I want to face it, head on. I want to be able to look it in the eyes, and it might be uncomfortable and it might kick my butt a bunch of times, but in the end, I mean, if I'm ever going to get past that, I've got to face it. And so, yeah, I mean, I've got to be able to look at, if something reminds me of cancer or fight, or makes me, think about what it's like to be gone, to die, to never see my kids or my family and friends again. If that's what it brings up in my mind, that's okay with me. It is. It's okay with me, because I want to be able to look that in the face, and I want to be able to move past it and see the hope that Jesus puts in any circumstance. And so I think, really, if we're really truly grabbing at life and focusing on hope, then we face those things, and we can still maintain hope even when they bring up feelings or reminders, or they cause me to cry. That's okay. That's okay. I can be okay with that. So those are my feelings going in, to this. I look forward to it. I've liked a lot of Thor stuff in the past, so I'm looking forward to this movie. But I will do part two, and maybe I'll change my mind, and maybe I'll go, oh my gosh, that was terrible, or something. I don't think I will, but we'll see. But that's my feelings going in. So this is part one, kind of Cancer and Thor, Love and Thunder. Keep wanting to say God of Thunder, Love and Thunder, and I'll give you my post movie attendance, thoughts, in part two. All right, love you guys. Talk to you soon.